Welcome to Storytime, etc. We try to post scary stories every day, so please subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified.
Story 1. True, 4 a.m. fire. I live in an old apartment building. I've been here for about 2 years and my roommate and I have had very few scary experiences so far. Except for this one that happened last summer. It was around 4 in the morning when we were woken from a dead sleep by the fire alarms going off throughout our entire 4-story apartment building. Seeing as this place is occupied mostly by seniors, we figured someone had left a pot on the stove again. I grumbled and blindly grabbed for a blanket. Last time we had a false alarm. I was left shivering and barefoot on the sidewalk waiting for the fire department, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. My roommate and I put on our shoes, I grabbed my phone and keys, and we poked our head out into the hallway. Nothing seemed off. The hall was empty. No one else had come out of their apartments yet. Reluctantly, my roommate and I walked down the hall toward the lobby. We figured our neighbors would soon follow suit. It was only when we went through the lobby and out the front door that we realized something was actually wrong. A handful of people who had already come out of the building were running and shouting about how the building was actually on fire this time. We followed them around to the side of the building as more and more people fled in their pajamas, and to our horror, we saw an apartment on the top floor belching out flames. People were frantic, searching for water, a ladder, anything. Someone remarked that there was a lady who lived in that apartment who had mobility issues and she needed to be rescued now, and where the hell was the fire department? My roommate was quite disturbed by the whole scene, so we decided to go back to the front of the building, away from the fire. On our way, we saw a guy jump off his balcony to the ground. He rolled when he landed, but I think it still really hurt, judging from how he sat on the grass and groaned for a while. He was lucky to only be on the second floor. There was chaos, yelling, screaming, an odd mix of panic and disinterest, especially among the senior citizens who didn't want to leave the building because using the stairs was so difficult. The fire department arrived much quicker than they ever had before, seeing as this was a real emergency, and it wasn't long before elderly ladies in nightgowns were being rescued via ladders and wheeled off to the hospital next door. At one point, the man who lived below the apartment on fire had a screaming episode at one of the landlords, the one that looked like a walking skeleton with an oxygen tank and a scooter. By the time the fire department got everything under control, it was around 6 or 7 a.m. The sun was up and people were beginning their morning commute. The fire department had blocked off our whole street, which must have been a pain, and the entire population of my building sat on the curb in pajamas and blankets. Little kids, old people, broke college kids, the works. The community really pulled together that morning. The public bus service gave us a couple buses to sit and warm up in instead of standing around on the chilly sidewalk. Paramedics handed out blankets and assessed injuries. The people in the surrounding houses were kind enough to bring us water and snacks. One lady brought a serving tray with mugs of tea from her own kitchen and offered it to anyone she could find. My mom came down to rescue my roommate and I, even though she lived an hour outside of town and hadn't even showered yet. She brought us breakfast and a change of clothes, as we didn't know when we'd be allowed back into the building. The most disturbing details of what had just taken place that morning came to us as we were waiting on the bus. Everyone was talking about the fire, of course, but one man had a particularly horrifying detail to add. He'd heard through the grapevine that the lady whose apartment caught fire never made it out of the building. Sadly, we suspected as much, with her mobility issues and all. But there was more. The firefighters apparently found her in the hall. She had made it out of her apartment, but couldn't escape the smoke. Whether she died from smoke inhalation or from burns, we aren't sure. But one thing that man said that sticks with me is that someone said that as they stood outside and watched the flames, they heard the woman screaming, "Help me, I'm burning." I've always been afraid of burning to death, and the idea that my neighbor may have had such a horrifying end is deeply disturbing. I know the man who lived below her heard her screaming. He wouldn't stop talking about it. I think he ended up with a form of PTSD from this event, and I don't blame him. We were all brought to a community center where the fire department and emergency response volunteers helped bring some clarity to the situation and told us what to expect. Everyone was very kind and sympathetic to us. Whatever we needed, they provided for us. I think all of that is pretty standard procedure, but still, I was extremely thankful to the kindness of the volunteers, firefighters, paramedics, and Good Samaritans. It was pretty surreal to be in a situation like that. We had almost nothing on us. My roommate hadn't thought to grab her phone, so she had to borrow mine to let her family know she was okay. We had no money, no ID, none of the essentials, and we had no idea how long we would be homeless. I hadn't been so happy to have my mum with me in a long time. I felt like a scared little girl, even if I didn't show it. We were lucky. The fire happened on the opposite end of the building from us. Our unit was totally unaffected, and we were one of the few allowed back into our apartment that same day. The building stunk of smoke for weeks. Even though the fire took place on the 4th floor in a single apartment, the damage was extensive. Even on the ground floor, the walls were blackened with ash. When they attempted to start fixing up the building, they found asbestos in the walls. A few people were forced to move out of their apartments, and we're talking people who had lived there for around 30 years. I remember the night we were allowed back into our apartment. I wanted to box up my most important possessions and keep them in my car, as if I thought the building was going to catch fire again. My home didn't feel safe anymore, and it wouldn't for several weeks. It would take a long time for us to hear anything about what caused the fire. Last I heard, a space heater was to blame, but I don't know for sure. In the days that followed, the fire was featured on the front page of the local paper. The family that lived just down the hall from us were featured in the picture. The article spelled out details that I had already heard. It labeled the guy that lived below the fire as a hero for attempting to save the lady upstairs. It was a valiant effort, but there was nothing he could have done without endangering himself. I feel sorry for him, and I often wonder if the guilt keeps him up at night. Sometimes I think about the lady who passed away in this building. I listen to a lot of ghost stories, so I wonder if her spirit haunts this place. Her sudden and horrifying death would be the sort of thing to make a ghost linger on Earth, wouldn't it? So many things left unfinished. Regardless, I hope she's at peace, and I hope that my neighbors have been able to find some semblance of peace as well. 4 months later, we've regained a sense of normalcy. Things are back to how they were before, if you ignore the orange tarps around the side of the exterior, the restoration vans that come and go every day, and the security guards stationed in the lobby. The damaged wing is still closed while they try and sort out the asbestos situation, but for those of us who live on the other end of the building, things are relatively normal. I hope they stay that way. Story 2. My true horror story. So, back when I was in the 9th grade, the year was 2017, and I was starting a new school. I was a 14-year-old boy, so obviously I had hormones, and for this I know I'm a filthy scumbag, but I used to masturbate in classes like a lot. Now you might be thinking, how the fuck do you masturbate in class? Well, I threw my jacket over myself and started doing the deed. It was that simple. But you might want me to get to the point, but keep in mind I was depressed back then and followed an emo phase, so my 100-pound skinny jean wearing self glared at a girl named Eliza. Obviously it's not her real name. So Eliza glared back at me, and being the dirty 14-year-old I got so hard by the fact she was looking back at me, I began doing it harder than faster, but then heard her gentle voice saying, "You jerk off a lot in school. It's a bad habit, and it's probably because you never had the real thing." She paused and said, "I can give you some of it after school." These words registered in my teen head came out to, "You're gonna get laid by the hot emo girl." So the whole day I was getting in my head about how it would go until the end of the day. As I saw her in the hallway, she grabbed my hand and conducted me outside to her house. Unusually, her parents weren't home. I found this odd. As we got into her room, I analyzed her bedroom walls as I saw posters of emo bands like My Chemical Romance, Panic at the Disco, and 3 Days Grace. I glistened in joy as someone else has the same taste, and right when I was about to ask you like, she was already giving my Virgin Emo reproduction system a try as she said, "You taste so good." That's when I shit you not, she bit down on my you-know-what. I screamed and said, "You fucking bitch," as I grabbed my you-know-what in pain. Then she yelled a word in German, I suppose. It really sounded like it. That's when she pushed me out in the hallway, and my eyes to this day still remember what I saw. She closed her door and said 3 words that hurt my soul. "Fucking Satanist, die." That's when I realized what this shit looked like. It had long legs, long arms, and was naked. But it had no genitals, and it was white. Its fucking face. It makes me cry by just remembering it. Its face had 2 holes as eyes. I assume, as it said, "God will do you justice by me putting you in hell." Now this is my guess. This girl was some hardcore Christian who summoned a skinwalker or some shit to kill people who she thought worshipped Satan because they were emo. As this thing walked past, I thought, I'm going to die. All I wanted to do was pleasure myself, and now I'm going to die. Now you might call me a pussy for this, but I don't care. I got on my knees and cried, praying to Jesus not to take me away, telling him every bad thing I done, as the bitch Eliza walked out laughing and said, you're gonna burn in hell for what you did. Now, courageous me got up and said, come on you fucking demons, kill me and see what happens. I doubt I would let any one of you touch me. Now, thank you mom, thank you for buying the hyperbeast knife, I told you it would help me. I remembered my knife I begged my mom to get me was in my pocket. I got it out in a hurry and said, now, if you take one more step fucker, I will cut this girl up so bad that she won't be able to talk. As the demon, beast said, finally the Satanist in you has revealed stealing the life of an innocent girl. For your own sake, scum, he said, I screamed, I'm not a Satanist, as I was wearing a crucifix my great-grandma gave me for my 9th birthday. I flashed it at them and they covered their eyes in pain. As I said smirking, now who's the Satanist now? As I ran out the house, I ran and never stopped until I got home. I continued laughing and said thank you God, thank you. I recently told my mother about this story since she can't be mad and put me out about trying to have sex. But I told my dad right when it happened, but I expected him to not believe me. When I told him, his eyes lit up and said Eliza under his breath. He said, son, what's her last name? I mumbled Porter. He said, son, Eliza Porter was my girlfriend in 1999. She died 18 years ago. That's impossible. I froze and thought to this day, I really think that was a skinwalker, but please help me figure out who or what this was. And to fake Eliza, I hope we never meet again.
Story 3. Paranormal Ghost Story. Grandma Loves Me from the Other Side? I am a 25-year-old female. For the purpose of anonymity, I will refer to myself as Sabrina. I am from Romania. English is not my native language, but I shall try my best to make the story easy to be understood. My stories contain what you would call angels, spirits, demons, archangels, satanic people doing forbidden sessions of voodoo and everything, but for this particular story, I sorta believe, this is not necessarily a bad encounter, or so I lie to myself, sometimes. There are many stories that I would love to share with you. You can either decide to share them, I don't mind, but mainly I just wish to talk with someone who has went through what I did and can understand and empathize with it based on your personal experiences. The one story that I can and will share with you for now, I need time to think if I'm ready to share the less fortunate experiences for now. I live in Romania. Our country has Orthodox religion, basically very similar to Christianity. We believe in God and Jesus Christ, with small certain similarities and differences. For example, IDK, if it's the same as Catholics do, we keep the deceased for a night. We call it the sleeping duty or guard night. We do not take that body out of its house she has lived in for their entire life in order to help the spirit find its way to heaven easier. The next 2 days, as we bury the bodies after 3 days, we take the body to the church where loved ones, but not relatives, to the deceased may come and pay respects to that person. After this process concluded, we bury the body at the cemetery where the priest will chant prayers helping the spirit of the deceased understand that she is no longer among the living, as Romanians are very spiritual people and believe in the afterlife, spirits and even in bad spirits that linger the world unable to move on. Understanding this is important as the story is pretty detailed itself. I had 5 grandparents, 3 grandmothers and 2 grandfathers. My first grandfather, we shall call him Michael, died when I was 6 years old due to a heart attack in August 2007. He raised me and his death marked my life ever since because I couldn't grasp the significance of death. I would frequently dream about him, his messages, his signs. I would hear him in my dreams as he would guide me to be a good person and so on. But even then, as a child, I knew what was a dream and what was reality. His wife, whom we shall call Anna, was my adoptive grandmother, as my real, by blood, grandmother, named Margaret, has died when my mom was 2 years old due to an abortion. I'm not sure if she was trying to abort my mother or a third child, since my mother has a brother and she was the second child. During the communist years, 1946 to 1989, Romania had a strict law regarding abortions, and women would abort the fetuses on their own, in the privacy of their homes by themselves, as no medics would agree to help with the procedure due to fear of being sentenced to life in prison. She died of septicity and my mother grew up without a mother until the age of 6 years old. Needless to say, I never met her or knew anything about Margaret, my blood grandmother, but this story is about my grandmother, adoptive one, named Anna. She was a very spiritual, wise, kind-hearted and intelligent woman. She never had children of her own. She adopted my mom and uncle. Their names aren't important for the story. My grandfather, Michael, was only dating my grandmother, but after my mother had met her on a family visit on her side in Iasi, Moldova, it's a town in Romania, they got married soon after. My grandfather was a military general and raising 2 children of 6 years and 13 years was hard. How they decided to get married? Well, it was thanks to my mother, because as soon as she first saw Grandma Anna, she went straight to her, at the age of 6, raised her both arms up at her and asked, in a jolly child voice, "Hi, my name is Christina, would you like to be my mommy?" My grandmother burst in tears, picked her up and immediately created a connection with my mother, whom she raised and loved as her own. It was not the same for my uncle, as he was 13 at that time and knew his own mother, Margaret, had died and why. He denounced her and made her life much harder. After raising my mom and uncle, my uncle had 2 children of her own, a boy and a girl. She raised the girl, and when the boy was born she had a calcium crisis that made her faint and hit her head. She refused to raise my cousin afterwards as she was afraid she would drop holding the baby. My uncle never forgave her for that and hated her even more. When I was born, I was the light of their life as she loved my mother from moment one, and my grandfather Michael adored my mother. Because I am a replica of my mother, same eyes, same face, same body shape, they immediately took me in and raised me, as my father worked in 3 different jobs and my mom was a pediatric nurse and worked in shifts. I loved growing up with her. Like I said, she was an extremely spiritual person. She loved to meditate. She would tell me about her dreams. She taught me how to decode them and what it meant. She told me about ghost encounters she had in her life and always told me not to fear any spirit that comes close to me in my life, because ghosts see us as beams of light guiding them to God when they are confused. Yes, that was my grandmother Anna for you. She did this until I was 18. We were very close, and I was living 5 minutes away from her, so I would visit her daily, sometimes still sleep at her place. Her hobby was to read the future in some cards she had owned, not tarot cards, but normal cards with some inscriptions she had, such as, "Encounter with mysterious man, beware, crying child, careful, dangerous woman." I can give you photos of the pack. It's just that the words are in Romanian, but I can translate them for you if you wish. Also, I would have to go to my parents' house since I have moved from there, and the cards deck remained there. On the New Year morning of 2017, at 3:15 a.m., I called my grandma Anna to wish her a happy new year and to let her know how much I and my family loved her and appreciated her. I'd like to mention that Romanians rarely express their love by saying, "I love you," to our mothers, fathers, grandparents. We consider that you show your love by what you do in your life and how you respect them rather than just say the words. But that night, for the first time in 23 years, at that time, in 2017, I felt the need to tell her that. I still don't know why. Her voice changed. You could hear her chuckle in soft happy tears as she would hear that, and said she loves us all back and forever will. Nothing seemed suspicious, as I am a very sensitive and emotional woman myself, so the night went on normally. She was at a party. I was with my fiancé's house. The next day, the 1st of January 2017 at 5:30 p.m., I receive a phone call from my father who told me that Grandma Anna had died the previous night. I couldn't express in words how my heart simply left my body, as if my own existence stopped, refusing to acknowledge that she was dead. I rushed home. The police was there, the ambulance was there. They say she died of a heart attack due to the climate change, same as my grandfather Michael did 11 years before her by the same cause. Outside it was cold, inside the house it was too hot, and as she was rushing to change her clothes, her heart couldn't handle the temperature change, her body couldn't balance the heat. And she died. But what I found particularly weird is the time of death. I still had her last phone call, 3:15 a.m. The policemen and ambulance staff unreleased her and declared her Todd was around midnight. They said there was no way I could have talked to her at 3:15 a.m. as for by that time the body would have already began the rigor mortis stage. Who did I talk to? Because it was her phone number, it was her voice, and she seemed incredibly fine. Call it a sick joke or just medical staff Todd error. Creepy. During her funeral, I decided to write her a goodbye letter as I am very spiritual, and even though no one will read it, I like to consider she took the message I had for her in heaven to pass it down to my other grandmother, Margaret, and 2 grandfathers, Michael and Peter. I wrote in that letter that I do love her a lot, that I thank her for every sacrifice she has done for me, and that I wish to tell Margaret, the real grandmother which I have never met because she died from an abortion long before I was born, that I love her too although I have never met her. I put that letter in my grandmother's coffin, kissed her forehead, and watched her go on her last road. My mom knows about the letter, she yet has asked me about what I wrote in it. After her funeral, I get a phone call from my grandmother, yes, my Nana Anna. At first I thought it was my father, as he would still use her phone to let all our relatives from other countries that she has died. So normally, I answer the phone, and I hear something unimaginable, impossible, formidable. I hear my Nana Anna. I hear her voice clearly, I hear her laughly voice, with intermittence and static occurring whenever she would pause. It was a soft, fading voice, but nothing scary, nothing fearful or intimidating. It made me feel like she was indeed there, but I will admit the whole situation did freak me out. She said to me, "Hello dear, I called to let you know I passed the message and I love you too." I couldn't reply, as the phone call hung up right after. It left me feel so vulnerable, as I thought maybe someone is playing a sick joke, but it couldn't be that. I saw my Nana be buried myself, I saw the coffin be sealed, I saw the letter exist inside the coffin until the very last second. No one took it out to read it. She had 3 sisters, but they were all dead and none of them had her voice. No one could have repeated her voice that perfectly. But the even scarier part comes after that first phone call. After another week, I remember it was during another day of Monday, right 1 week after the first phone call, my phone starts ringing again under the same number. I answer, already have forgotten about what has happened, and I hear an old lady, a voice I couldn't feel familiar. I did not know who that lady was. It was a pretty soft but strong voice, it felt like a relatively young woman, but an experienced? I would say around 30 to 40 years or so. I would like to mention that this time I was in the same room with my father, who owned her phone still, and I received the call. Her phone is in front of me on the table and not ringing. I open her phone as I speak on my phone. Her phone had no battery and it was dead closed, but I still get her phone call. I answer. I hear this weird lady, and she goes like this, "Hello sweetheart. You don't know me but I do. I received your message and I love you too." Then the phone call hangs up again. Needless to say, I started screaming and panicking so hard that my dad immediately went to the telephone service to find out who is playing pranks on us. They went through her profile, numbers dialed and received. My number was not in her agenda of calls, so we decided to disable her number. Ever since then we do not receive calls anymore. But I do go to the cemetery more often and talk to them. This year is the first year from her death, so we are sort of celebrating her memory. But for me, personally, I do not celebrate her memory, as I feel she is constantly physically with me. I often have dreams of her. She would often visit me at nights. I'm saying dreams because I feel like I am going insane if I ever conclude on these situations being something other than dreams. I guess I am trying to thank you for giving me the possibility to share this with you. If you want to share my story further, to all the people out there who encounter ghosts or paranormal activity, I am going to say what my grandmother Anna taught me all my life. Do not be afraid of them, as they are just confused lost souls, who see you as beams of light helping them to find God. The way you feel about them will conclude in the way they react, and afterwards end up scaring you.
Thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And please like and subscribe to help support the channel.